Hello, this is Daniel Mart back again. I'm an actor and filmmaker based out of South Florida, and for this video, now that Final Destination Bloodlines is finally out, I'm going to be ranking all 6 Final Destination movies from worst to best. So here we go. At number 6, obviously, is... the Final Destination 4, I think this is general consensus, just the worst one in the series. So here's the thing with Final Destination, just in general, the franchise as a whole, which I've come to appreciate more, especially now that I just binge watched the entire series last week, and of course saw the new one. It's the fact that this is actually a surprisingly consistent movie series, especially for horror. Now, I'll also be honest with you, I haven't seen like every single horror franchise, let alone every single movie in every single horror franchise. Like, I've only seen a handful of Halloween movies. I've only ever seen the first Child's Play, for example, the first Nightmare, the first Friday the 13th. So that's the other thing with me. I'm not that well versed in like horror movie franchises, despite the fact that horror is my favorite genre. I usually just prefer watching like a standalone movie versus a franchise for some reason. I don't know why. Like Scream, that's another one I've only seen the first one of. But Final Destination is like the only series I can think of horror-wise that I've seen multiple movies. I mean, I guess there's something like Scooby-Doo as well, but that's in its own category. But because of that, you do get to notice, oh wait, these movies are actually very good across the board, and then you get to number 4. So here's the other thing. I used to like really not like this movie. Now, it's still in the bottom of the list, so I'm not saying it's like God tier or anything like that, but it's one of those things that I feel like if I almost just shut my brain off, like completely shut my brain off and just like look at the pure cartoon lunacy that's going on there, yeah, it's mildly enjoyable. The cast is bad, I think the actors are trying to do the best or get what they're giving, but what they're given is like very bad. The best actor in that film is Micto Williamson playing George, so I do think he's the best character in that bunch, even more so than Nickel Bannon, the guy. Nickel Bannon's the name of the character, but the Visionary. Honestly, I think the Visionary for Final Destination 4 is just the worst out of all the Visionaries. To be honest with you, out of all 6 or technically 7 Visionaries that we've gotten across the series. In the movie series, The Disaster, McKinney Speedway, I think in theory it's fun. I do like the spectacle of it all. I do think that is one of the few good things they do, but the problem is that it's just drenched in CGI. Starting with Final Destination 3, but I really got affected in Final Destination 4 specifically, is the fact that just their heavy over-reliance on CGI, especially for CGI gore. We like the practical effects. Now, we understand if CGI needs to be used to enhance the practical effects, but when the whole thing is just pure out CGI, it doesn't really matter. It makes it seem very cartoony, and that's one of the main complaints of this movie. The acting is, I think, for me, it's tolerable. It's not the best. It's not the worst, but again, that's also comes hand in hand with the fact that the actors are not given that much to work with to begin with. Also, just most of the most of the characters are just straight up unlikable. I mean, you have a straight up racist. The first person that dies, or technically second, is literally credited as racist. So there's that. You also have people just credited as MILF, Samantha / MILF. You also have Mechanic. Like, these characters' names, and then the credits are just given like descriptors like MILF, Mechanic, Mechanic's girlfriend, racist. Like, why? Like, what's the point? I always found that to be a little bit lazy from a production standpoint, as well as like you gave him a name. You even have Samantha / MILF, so you could have done like Andy / Mechanic, Carter / racist. I don't know. It just seemed kind of weird in that regard. Overall, it's the deaths are whatever. Hunt's death in the pool, I think, is the best one, but that's about it. Like, the other ones are kind of just average, in my opinion, or if not, just a little bit too cartoony. Like the one that always like kind of like, really? Is that really how that would happen? Is honestly Andy's death? The one where he gets like sliced with the fence, because like I'm just thinking, what kind of fence do you know? Like, most fences I know are like chain link fences, or the just fences with bars or whatever. It's not like these like weird diamond shaped things that are basically blades and you're able to slice through that. So that one, that's always kind of read weird to me. Just the way the foreshadowing for the deaths are also kind of weird. Also, Jonathan being for whatever reason, the cowboy Jonathan dying after Hunt and Janet in real life, but in the premonition he dies before. That also never made sense to me. To be fair, the whole thing was seeding, like, oh, depending on where you seed could affect how you die, especially if you're surviving. That's never been properly done in this movie or Final Destination 1, the only 2 movies they attempted that with. In all fairness, that's never been well done regardless. So yeah, I mean, I always thought, like, okay, if Jonathan was meant to die before Hunt and Janet, then he should still die before Hunt and Janet. Yes, he didn't say change seedings, but like he still survived. I don't see a reason why he would now be somewhere else in the list. So yeah, overall, just it's bad, but still watchable. So yeah, so that's what we have here. On to number 5, which is Final Destination 3. Now, maybe this is a hot take. Apparently, Final Destination 3 is like the dark horse pick for everybody's favorite movie in the franchise. I do realize that this movie has a lot of fans, but it always surprises me when people say, "Oh no, Final Destination 3, that's where it's at. That's my favorite one." And I can't blame you. I actually think that Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Julie, no, that's the sister, Wendy. As Wendy is probably one of the better visionaries across the series. I do think she's actually one of the better developed characters across the series. But my main problem with this movie is it's basically the fact that the cast revolving around her is just a little bit annoying. If I'm being honest with you. That's the thing with Final Destination. Their cast, like their ensemble, is a little bit hit and miss. It doesn't have to do with the acting, but it has to do more so with how they're written and how they're used in the story. And I do think they're a little bit hit and miss. Kevin, the main supporting guy, I find him to be just honestly kind of boring. If I'm being honest, no shame on the actor, no shade at the actor, but I just feel the way he's written is kind of just boring. But apparently, a lot of people like him because he was in a lot of Disney original movies around that time too. So. It seemed kind of random that he was here. Funny enough, Ashley Tisdale actually auditioned for this movie. She actually auditioned for like 3 Final Destination movies. Final Destinations 2, 3, and 4. And I think maybe 5 too. But I know for sure like 2, 3, and 4 she auditioned for parts in all 3 of those movies and never got it. I think she was the closest in getting a role in this movie because she was considered for the 2 Ashes, which would have been funny because Ashley Tisdale, and then Aaron as well. I think she was also heavily considered for Aaron. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I've never really cared for Kevin as a character. I always thought he was kind of just bland. And that's the thing with this. I just find the cast of characters here kind of bland, and the somewhat exciting ones, like let's say Ian, for example, or the Ashes, like they die. Either the Ashes die kind of early, so it doesn't really matter, or Ian is just kind of becomes a psycho, a very much emo psycho towards the latter half of the film. So it's like you're good to a point, and that's really it. Also, the ending to this movie. The other thing with the Final Destination is the fact that I'm sorry, but most of these endings across the series just kind of suck. They don't know, for whatever reason, they just do not know how to end a Final Destination movie. I'll get to probably what's the best ending soon. But like Final Destination 4, we're not even going to talk about that ending, especially because there's actually a detail from Bloodlines that may have affected that ending, which I'm going to discuss that once we get to Bloodlines. But here, like this one, it's like, yeah, it's a premonition, and yeah, you all presumably die, but for whatever reason, since it's never officially seen that the premonition went into fruition, despite us hearing the gears and whatever sounding, thus indicating a crash, because it was cut off, the movie ended right before the premonition truly began, or the actual disaster actually began. Technically speaking, Wendy, Kevin, and Julie, the sister, are unknown. We don't know if they technically survived. Like, that's official canon. They're actually considered unknown survival. I'm like, no, we literally hear the train crash. But that's a legit debate that people are still having to this day. What, like 15 or 20 years later? When did this movie come out? Now I think about it. So about 20 years later, that's because of that sole fact that we didn't see the actual disaster pan out. People are still debating to this day, about 2 decades later, did they actually survive? And that's honestly one of the most annoying things about this movie. Like, really? That's what we're going to debate on? Like I said, the deaths here are pretty cool, but again, like I said, for Final Destination 4 and Final Destination 3 is when they start really tampering with the effects of the movie. They use a lot of practical stuff, and then they kind of drench it with CGI. In some cases, it works, like with Aaron, where they just kind of CGI her eyeball to move a little bit to make it more realistic. That made sense. But like something like Luis Romero's death, or even Ian's death, where it's just drenched in CGI. Ian's death was still kind of done kind of well, but Luis Romero's the gymnast, the gym guy, like that was like, you look at the behind the scenes stuff for it. The practical looks amazing, and again, they just drenched in CGI. It's like whatever. And also, I don't really care for the disaster. In this, I actually think this is the worst disaster across the series. A roller coaster just seems kind of quaint, if I'm being honest with you. That's not to say that you can't die on a roller coaster, and granted, the chances of dying on a roller coaster are like extremely low, less than 1%, but I find it to be very quaint, and I kind of just don't like the fact that they're seating down. One of my biggest things for any of the deaths, whether it be a premonition or real life death, when the characters are being pursued by death, is that I liked it when they tried to escape, and there's like, you can't really escape from being hooked down to a seat. Granted, I don't find that complaint to be as applicable for, let's say, Flight 180, which I'll get to once we get to Final Destination 1, and I'll explain why there, but still, like, I also just kind of don't care for that disaster. I don't care for either disasters, whether it be the roller coaster or the subway disaster at the end. I don't care for both disasters to begin with, too. Again, one of the few things that Final Destination 4 actually did semi-well. Final Destination 3 is going to be number 5 on this list. Next up, so in 4th place, we have Final Destination 5. And honestly, had you asked me this about 2 weeks ago, before Bloodlines came out, and before I really started thinking about this, and before I rewatched every single movie, I would have said that Final Destination 5 is probably either my first or second pick for favorite movie. Straight up. So yeah, this one did drop dramatically, drastically. And while I was rewatching the movie, here's the thing, it does have the best ending. I think out of any of the 6 movies, this probably actually has the best ending, the twist ending, which I think really helps it a lot. I think the thing that really demotes it, honestly, is also the cast. It's not that I don't like the cast, and I do think the cast here has actually some of the better sets of actors across the board, where everybody actually is acting properly, so to speak, or like they know how to act. But again, I think a lot of the characters are very undercooked. You know, Olivia, Nate, and Dennis specifically, like you guys are very undercooked. Isaac kind of doesn't matter. Candace kind of doesn't matter, but like you're down to your 3 leads then, which are Sam, Molly, and Peter. And if I'm being honest, Sam is kind of a whatever visionary. Like I don't think he's the best visionary across the board. And Molly is kind of a sitting duck for most of the movie. Granted, part of it has to do because she survived the disaster, the North Bay Bridge disaster, so that's kind of why she's a bit of a sitting duck. And whereas Peter has the most active story in the whole thing, where he kind of becomes a villain, not even kind of, just becomes the antagonist alongside Death, becoming one of Death's servants at the end. But when that's your most interesting story, and granted, I do think it was a good way to explore another aspect of this franchise, you know, what happens when you do have an actual killer on the loose. I do think that was an interesting aspect to explore here. It's the fact that the flip side of what the B plot, so to speak, or I guess technically the A plot of the story with this romance, it's like, it's kind of whatever. Like, I really don't care for it. That's not to say that the actors are doing a bad job. I just feel like the writing for it is very undercooked. Now, I do like the fact that the main guy, Sam, he has his own day job, so to speak, and the fact that he has a life outside of what's going on, because I do think that's the issue with a lot of these movies where the visionary doesn't really have a life outside of the vision, so to speak. Like, it's one of those things where the vision, the premonition kind of becomes their life, whereas he actually tries to do something outside of that. And I do like that, and you know, in some respects, I guess I like the romance, but it's like, it's cute, but I also don't care for it. It's one of those things, like, yeah, it's cute, it's nice that they have it there, but like, I really don't care for it at the end. Like I said, some of the other characters are kind of like not really developed, and granted, some of these characters are just cannon fodder, but it's one of those things like when Candace and Isaac, for whatever reason, have more character development than Nate, Dennis, and Olivia. When the first 2 characters to die in this movie have more character development than the other 3 or 4 characters that come right after them, that's kind of weird. And granted, it's not like their character development is that good either, or like that expansive either, better said. But like, we get something out of them versus Dennis or Nate or Olivia. It's like, what's going on here? Nate does get a little bit of character development after the incident with Roy, but we don't really explore that much. And the only time we explore it is like moments before he dies. So that's maybe the one bad thing about the entry to this movie. Is like, really, I honestly didn't think it was gonna drop this low. I knew it was going to drop over Final Destination. I knew Bloodlines was going to be better than this after I saw it. I didn't think I was going to have Final Destination 1 over Final Destination 5. I'll say that. So the fact that it's here on 4th place, it's one of those things like, wow, how the mighty have fallen. At number 3, we have the newest one, Final Destination Bloodlines, or Final Destination 6, or whatever you want to call it. And Jesus Christ, was this a absolute return to form for the series. After not being active for the past 14 years, essentially, 15 years, we finally get a Final Destination, and they do something new with the formula. Bloodlines. Like, what happens if the survivors of a disaster, the disaster was completely prevented, and of course these people went on to have children because it took so long, because there's like 200 plus people who survived this incident. You know, after a while, people are going to have kids, and those kids are going to have their kids, and so on and so forth. So what does that do? He just cuts off every single bloodline. Yeah, that's what I was referring here for Bloodlines for Final Destination 4. Final Destination 4 has that mall scene, the mall explosion, which I actually think is one of the better premonitions or disasters across the series. Again, the only thing that Final Destination 4 did remotely well was the disasters, apparently. But my one gripe with the mall disaster has always been, okay, cool, he just prevented that disaster. There's a crap ton of people who survived. Shouldn't they be dying left, right, and center? Like, that was literally my training thought watching it back then. Granted, we only have 5 minutes left in the film too, so like, it's not like they're gonna really explore that, but like, you know, and granted, they've never officially touched that in general either, but the fact that this is a situation now that, oh, disaster prevented completely, the offspring of anybody who survives. Like, death is still going to come after those survivors, and death is going to come after anybody who's born after that. For me, that's kind of a resolution to that issue in Final Destination 4. That being set aside, I do think actually that Final Destination 6, Bloodlines, probably has the best disaster across the series. Not most iconic, because I do think another one has, we all know which one is probably the most iconic disaster. But I do think it's probably the best, and probably just in general, if not the best, definitely one of the best. That's, that depends on how you feel about it. With the Skyview disaster, Skyview collapse, tower collapse, restaurant collapse. So that's really cool. And also the fact that it takes place in the past for those first 20 minutes or so, 15-20 minutes. The fact that it all takes place in 1969, by the way, that's the official year. I don't know what's going on between cast and crew and people who are doing the interviews, but everybody's been saying oh, this takes place in the 50s, this takes place in the early 60s. Officially, it's 1969. Yeah, I do like that. Honestly, I do think this is probably the best cast, or one of the best casts, better said, that we've had. Some of the most likable characters with the best drama across the board. Because that's the thing with Final Destination 5 too. Let me just piggyback up on them again. These are all, for Final Destination 5, they're all co-workers. And yeah, they feel like co-workers, but it doesn't really seem like they were really that well friends or that close before the disaster. It's kind of one of those things, they were kind of just thrown together now that the rest of their company is gone, whereas here they have the connection. They have this one tangible thing that they're all connected through, in this case literal family, Vin Diesel family, and they feel like family, they feel like they're connected. Again, Final Destination 5, they have that connective tissue, but I would say even Final Destination 1 has a better connective tissue because they're all high schoolers, even to a certain extent. Final Destination 3 has a better connective tissue for them. That's another great for Final Destination 5. But back on number 6. So yeah, the one thing with number 6 is the fact that I do think it's a little bit too long. It's about an hour and 40 minutes, I want to say, or maybe 2 hours, I forget right there. But it is long, and it is the longest Final Destination movie across the board. So I do think there could have been some stuff cut out, and just some of the events that happen. And granted, this Final Destination, so everything is a little bit, dumb. You kind of do have to suspend your disbelief a little bit. But it's one of those things the characters, especially first off, Iris, this is happening. I know you're trying to prove a point, but if you don't want this to continue, your best course of action is honestly just stay here. Now, granted, she did try, convince Stephanie to stay, this and that, but I think there could have been another way to prove your point from her perspective. Maybe have her visit Tony Todd right off the bat and see what happens. Maybe in that way we get 2 scenes with Tony Todd. Maybe not, but still. Which I'll get to that scene in a bit too. But I do think there are some logical fallacies in that, just her reasoning for that, especially because she actively knows, oh, this is how I'm meant to die. It just seems kind of weird for her to pull that, even with the explanation that I'm trying to prove a point. It's I think your point could have been proven another way, but okay. And kind of going off with that, the main thing everybody's talking about is the MRI scene, and I'm not going to deny, that MRI scene is golden, but I think after a while, when the only thing that people are talking about are the MRI scene and the disaster, it's what's going on in the rest of the film that people aren't talking about. And again, it's one of those things where it's not that the rest of the film is that bad, but I think it really does peak at those moments. And I think that's the thing with Final Destination 6. It just has peaks. Whereas it's not really like that in any of the other movies. It does have its moments where it peaks a little bit, but it's still generally good like that. It's almost like that. Whereas Final Destination 6, it peaks, and then it kind of goes down. And granted, it's not the stuff in between is bad, but when it peaks, it really peaks. That's kind of the logic with it behind it. I do think that, and I'm pretty sure I already mentioned this, but I'm pretty sure this is the best cast, or one of the best casts across the board. I think from an acting perspective, definitely some of the best actors across the board. That being said, I'm sorry, but Stephanie is probably the second worst visionary we've had across the board. And I guess third, depending how you want to include Iris there or not. They're just barely better than Nick O'Bannon from Final Destination 4, because she feels like such an afterthought in her own movie, and her as a protagonist seems like such an afterthought. She seems more like a vessel to say hey, this is what's going on, this and that. Honestly, the other family, that her cousins are a lot more interesting. All 3 of them are a lot more interesting than her and her brother. I think that's really the one major issue I would say against Final Destination 6 is the fact that the main characters feel like side characters in their own movie. And honestly, I don't really like the ending, in the sense, for 2 reasons. After the hospital, you just go back to the cabin, and we all know what happens in the cabin. If you've seen the movie, you've seen the movie, but it's one of those things that kind of just resolves itself so quickly. It's what was the point of going back to this cabin? I understand why they went there, but you knew death was gonna follow you regardless. Even when Stephanie went there earlier to visit Iris, death was still there. Maybe not as prevalent, as he should have, so to speak, but he was still there, so I don't understand why going to this cabin immediately says like, oh, Death is not gonna be there anymore. It just seemed like kind of a weird leap in logic. Granted, she's still figuring out how Death works, so I guess that's the explanation. And the very last disaster, which involves a train, I mean, I don't like it, if I'm being honest. Like I've mentioned for Final Destination 3 and 4, and maybe even 5 to a little bit too, I think about it, CGI does kind of rule over the effects in the series, especially, again, 3, 4, 5 a little bit, and 6 not as much as I thought it was, but I do think that the final Stinger Death really does rely on CGI in a way that I just didn't enjoy. Granted, given what's going on, you kind of need to rely on CGI. I don't blame them, but it's like one of those things like, no, just no. And there was also kind of a selfish part of me that I thought like, oh, maybe this should be a premonition as well, a la Final Destination 3. The only thing is, I would have said, I have the brother have the premonition this time and not the sister. I think that would have been interesting. Granted, they should have died. I don't really care that part, because Final Destination 7 is going to be a completely new cast. Granted, they haven't confirmed Final Destination 7, but like, let's be honest, So, yeah, that's the one thing I do. I think it's good. I think when I first saw it, I was on a really high. I'm like, oh, this is the best one. But like right now, really thinking about it, but haven't seen it a few days ago at this point, and really seeing what other people are saying and thinking about it more and more. I think this is the best place. So yeah, it's at the top 3. Really good return to form. I can't wait to see what we have for Final Destination 7. And I wonder what tagline they're gonna have at the end. Bloodlines. I don't know, like maybe Final Destination 7. This is the end, or something like that. I don't know. We'll see. Next up, at number 2, we have.
To give me a second, because apparently I forgot to mention the whole thing with Tony Todd and his last scene. Oh my gosh, that was such an emotional and impactful scene. I was quite literally basically crying. I saw this with my friend, and I was basically crying throughout that whole scene. I mean, Tony Todd, just one of the great actors, especially for horror. Candyman, of course, and Final Destination, this being technically one of his last films. Here's the thing, if you go on IMDb, he actually has a few things are still like in post-production. So this really isn't his last film, but I do think this is the last thing he ever filmed, period, if that makes sense. And yeah, it was just so emotional. And I also did like the shout out to Kimberly Corman. I do wish we would have seen Kimberly Corman, especially because we did have those behind the scenes set photos where she did visit the set. So I do wish we would have seen that. If they do Final Destination 7, they should probably have Kimberly Corman then be like the new Tony Todd, so to speak. Have AJ Cook as Kimberly Corman be the new Tony Todd, be the new William Bloodsworth. And yeah, and the fact that we saw his backstory there, that was also great. That's something that we've also wanted to see for some time already in the series. Just great. So that last scene is great. I cannot believe I forgot to talk about that here. And wow, I'm bad. Now on to the actual number 2. Let's go.
At number 2, we have the OG Final Destination 1. Or I guess Final Destination 1, just Final Destination. Not the Final Destination, that's number 4. Just Final Destination. And honestly, I think when it comes to the actual cast, this is the best cast. I am willing to say that this is the best cast we've had in every single movies in terms of the characters. Like, just best written characters across the board, just the most likable characters across the board. Again, Final Destination 6 does give it a run for its money in this regard, but I think just across the board, these are some of the best characters we've had, period. I also would say that it's probably some of the best acted characters across the board too. Best written, best acted, best everything. And for me, rewatching every single movie at this point, I think that's something I really gravitated towards this time around. Because at first, for me, it was only really about the deaths and the gore and this and this and that. I really wasn't paying attention to some of the other plot elements, like how do you get from points A to B, and what are these characters doing from here to there. And rewatching all the movies last week, that's what really took to me. Like, oh wait, I kind of really want to enjoy the cast I'm viewing. Granted, you can have maybe one character who's maybe not as likable, let's say the racist or Hunt, but again, that's Final Destination 4. So you have all of them who are unlikable. But, in other movies, maybe someone like Ian is the one unlikable person. Or I guess Louis Romero, even though he barely appears in the movie, And Final Destination 2, I guess the intention for that is technically Rory, but even he's kind of likable. I would say maybe Kat, maybe, but even she's kind of likable. So the intention is to always have one unlikable character. And here, that badge of honor kind of goes to Carter, but even then, he's kind of likable in his own right, and you understand where he's coming from. Overall, I do think that this is the best cast, and that's the main reason where I really jumped over Final Destination 5 because Final Destination 5 doesn't really have that strong cast of characters. Final Destination 1 does have that strong cast of characters going off from it. It's the first one. How original of a concept is this? You know, to have Death be the killer himself. You survive an incident, and now Death is coming back for you because you survived. That's killer. You know, in the past we've had Ghostface, we've had Freddy Krueger, we've had Chucky, all these, you know, Michael Myers, whatever. We've never actually had the embodiment of Death. I guess not even technically the embodiment because he's more of a force, but the force of Death actually come after you. Also, you have Tony Todd. You know, that scene. I know I just realized I skipped over it in Final Destination 6, but that scene in Final Destination 6, it's such a moving, powerful scene. But we don't get that powerful scene, that moving scene, without him originally being featured in Final Destination 1, in Final Destination 2, Final Destination 5, and granted, I do think that his best appearance is probably in Final Destination 6. And then if not, maybe Final Destination 5. Because 1 and 2, the way he's using 1 and 2 is kind of like, not throwaway, because he has such gravitas, but it's one of those things like you're kind of taking a detour just to show famous movie actor from a horror movie, Candyman, in your franchise. It kind of does feel a little bit like that. But yeah, that aside though, overall, I do think because of that, this is, just because of the cast alone, it is one of the stronger movies as well. I mean, that's also pretty iconic. I would say Terry Chaney's death alone is probably the most iconic death across the series. Not the disasters. We all know which disaster is probably the most iconic. But in terms of just individual deaths, I'm willing to bet that Terry Chaney's death is probably the most iconic one across the series. So much so that they even repeated it in Final Destination 4. I mean, we have the fact that 2 characters at the end canonically survived for a while, one of them returning in the sequel, the other one being killed by a brick off screen, which that's a whole different conversation. But overall, like I do think that the most likable, and that's the other thing, I didn't realize how much I actually really enjoyed Alex Browning, Devon Sawa as Alex Browning as a visionary. I actually do think that he is actually one of the better visionaries. I'll be honest, I think the best visionaries across the series are in 1, 2, and 3. I'll be honest, because they're actual characters, and not they're not like voices who are sending a message of like, hey, this is what's going on. They're actual characters struggling and dealing with this. 5, kind of there. 4, forget about it. And 6, I mean, she's the definition of just a talking script, so to speak. So great actress, good actress, but just like they didn't really give her anything to work with. But yeah, overall just great. I mean, honestly, the only real bad thing I don't like about this is honestly Valerie Luden's death, and apparently that's a hot take because everybody actually really enjoys that death. I don't enjoy it that much, but besides the point, I think everything else about here, how it's establishing the rules of death, even though there's some avenues like they don't really follow up through at the end, I still think it's good. And the ending is actually one of the better endings across the series. Now, I don't think it's a perfect ending, especially because if you know behind the scenes, there were reshoots for this. Originally, they had a completely different ending. People didn't like it, so now they have this ending, which I actually think is a better ending. But again, Final Destination really does have a problem with ending their movies. I don't think the original Final Destination, I don't think had that problem, so to speak. And yeah, I mean, overall, just one of the better movies. And again, I'm really, really genuinely surprised by how much I like it now. Because originally, I would only rewatch 2 and 5, maybe sometimes 1 and 3, and oh yeah, 4 is a thing. I guess I'll watch it later, you know. But now it's probably gonna be like, hey, I'll definitely watch all these movies. 4 is probably still gonna be a bit of an afterthought, but still, I'll definitely watch all these movies and be excited to watch number 1. So I mean, yeah, it's such a great appreciation for this movie now that I've rewatched and really know what I'm looking for in this series. And at number 1, that means we have Final Destination 2. So, here's the thing. Final Destination 2 is probably the first Final Destination movie I saw. Final Destination 1 is probably the last Final Destination movie I saw. You know, excluding Bloodlines, because, obviously, you know? So, I do find that kind of dichotomy just kind of interesting. I also like how I have it as 4-3, 5-6, 1-2. I always have them in pairs, you know? Kind of seems a little bit funny in that regard, now that I'm looking at it. But, yeah, Final Destination 2 is my favorite one of the series, and it's one of those things, like, even before watching this movie, I knew the general premise of Final Destination. You know, you escape death from this disaster, and death is coming to haunt you down. But Final Destination 2, they go backwards. So I remember when I was first watching it, and I'm seeing, okay, cool, the officer, Thomas Burke, he's the one who, you know, he gets the log truck, which we'll talk about that disaster in a bit, you know, but he gets the log truck, or the log right through his face, and then all of a sudden, wait, why is the blonde one dying? Why is Evan, he died at the end? This makes no sense. You know, next up should be Eugene, should be the black guy. But no, he's not dying. It's actually it's actually was it Tim? Is he the next one to die? Right? It's like, why is this going backwards? And then figuring this stuff out with the characters, I found it very interesting. Honestly, I do think this is maybe not the strongest cast of characters, really looking back at it, but I do think it has some of my favorite, like, just low-key characters. I mean, for me, Rory is always just going to be randomly one of my favorite characters. The way Jonathan Cherry portrays him, always is randomly going to be one of my favorite characters. I do think Kimberly Corman is probably the strongest protagonist we've had. If not Alex, then definitely Kimberly across the board. And especially even more so now that canonically, she, and by extension Burke, do survive. They are, at least in the movies, because remember, Final Destination is just not just the movies. We have comics and novels. But in terms of the movies, canonically speaking, Kimberly Corman and Thomas Burke are the only characters in the movies to have officially cheated death, no matter what. So I do very much enjoy that revelation. I do kind of wish we would have seen them in Final Destination 6. I know there was rumors and possible leaks of that happening. That would have been great. Maybe a post-credit scene of, like, just seeing Bloodworth's grave, and then we just see Corman and Burke there, at the gravesite or something like that. That would have been nice. Overall, I do think this is the best one. This is the first one I saw, so it's the one that really hooked me up. Again, it has some of the best deaths. I mean, Evan's death with the ladder. Of course, I would say Roy's death for sure is one of my favorite ones as well. That being said, I will say it has probably the two most disrespectful deaths across the series at the same time, with Alex Browning just dying because of a brick off screen, and then them cleaning off Claire. Like, Claire at that point would have been a legacy character, so I think she should have gone out in style, and instead she gets killed in a hospital explosion that the setup for it honestly makes very little sense, alongside another character from that same movie. And I don't know, just that one's also, I've never really liked that one. Even back then, I've never really liked the way she died. I thought it was cool at first, like, oh my gosh, and then realizing, oh wait, who this character was afterwards, like, oh my gosh, now think about it, that's how she went out. Why did she go out that way? So yeah, but those two little details aside, I still think this is the best one across the series. Again, the ending not as strong as, let's say, Final Destination 1, to be honest with you, or even Final Destination 5. Not as strong of an ending as the other ones. I think this one kind of has the same thing as Final Destination 6 to a certain degree, where once they get to a certain location, the cabin in Final Destination 6 and the hospital in Final Destination 2, once they get to this certain location, and the plot kind of just rushes through everything else. So I do have that complaint. The only difference is that the character they kill at the end of Final Destination 2 is kind of a throwaway character and is kind of used as a gag, which I find hilarious. And yeah, this is also the movie where we start getting some comedy elements of it. It doesn't really go full-blown to Final Destination 4, I would say. And granted, I think the best use of comedy across this franchise would actually be Final Destination 6. But overall, I just thought it was great. Just a really great franchise overall, and really great movie. And again, like I said at the beginning of this video, one of the more consistent one of the more consistent movie series across the board that we've had, and especially in horror. And granted, again, like I said, I know I haven't seen every single movie in every single franchise and series and whatever, but I'm still gonna hold to that, and that seems to be a rather popular opinion anyways. So yeah, that's basically it for the rankings. Again, we have it as Final Destination 4, The Final Destination, Final Destination 3, Final Destination 5, Final Destination 6, Final Destination Bloodlines, Final Destination 1, or Final Destination, and Final Destination 2. So that is the ranking for you. There you go. Can't wait to eventually see Final Destination 7 in about, 2 to 3 years? I mean, I'm just saying, this is making bank. Here's a weird little detail. Final Destination 4, The Final Destination, is the highest grossing movie in the series. So, if Final Destination 4 can make bank, Final Destination Bloodlines definitely can make bank, especially with the reviews it's getting. It's getting some of the best reviews since the original movie. I don't know what's the next best reviewed movie across the board. Maybe I think it's either 1 or 5. It has to be one of those two. And the fact that it's getting the best, and by a large margin. I mean, I'm sorry, if this doesn't get a sequel at this point, then it really just does come down to, like, studios not knowing what to do this with the series. Like, that's why this movie took so long. 15 years to be made, essentially 14, 15 years, because of just studio stuff. It's not even studio interference, it's more like studio incompetence, if I'm being honest. At this point, if you don't make a 7th one, I truly don't know what you're doing at that point. So, yeah, make a 7th one, let's go from there. And, I don't know, maybe I'll do a video saying, giving you guys some ideas as to what could be in the 7th movie, or what should be in the 7th movie, or what they could do in the 7th movie. I don't know, maybe I'll do that video, who knows. But yeah, that's basically it for now. This is Daniel Mart signing off, and tell me what your favorite Final Destination movie is down below. Goodbye.